If you were born in 1972, then you'll be celebrating your 50th trip around the sun this year. Congratulations! You share the same age as some astounding inventions, like the jet ski, digital watch, and hacky sack. You were also born alongside a very unique beverage distribution company. Yes, Vintage Wine Distributor is turning 50 in 2022. The esteemed wholesaler has created a reputation of excellence and care throughout the fine wine industry of Ohio. But the vintage wine story has remained untold. Until now.
Vintage Wine is a wholesaler of wines. They take the responsibility for finding the wine, contracting with the suppliers of wine, buying the wine, and then reselling it at a markup. So they're an in-betweener.
We import wine from all over the place, East Coast, West Coast, wine growing regions around the world, and we sell them to customers, the trade customers throughout the state of Ohio.
We distribute to restaurants. We distribute obviously retail, so grocery, independent retail, national restaurant chains.
Beverage stores, grocery stores, clubs, people with permits. That's what we do.
We distribute to everyone. We handle every level in the retail world and in the restaurant. Nobody's too small and nobody's too big.
We send a fleet of sales reps out to sell the wine, but we also have an entire operations team behind it that brings the wine from all over the world, houses it, and then gets it out to the customers at the same time.
Grand scheme of things, our competitors, we're number 3 or 4 in the state. We are small enough to be relevant to a lot of our great independent restaurants and retailers, but we're also large enough to service all the customers, maybe even be a pain in the ass to some of our big competitors.
The functions of the company certainly by definition is a distributor, but it's honestly a little bit more than that, because I believe that vintage wine started with visionary leaders.
These were the visionary leaders of Gene Perino and Jim Forbes, alongside their counselor Sterling Newell. But before we talk about them, we need to talk about another name.
Part of the reason vintage wine is in existence is because of a gentleman named Jürgen von Luttwitz. Jürgen emigrated from East Germany between the 2 world wars. His family had been significant military dignitaries within the German government. In fact, his brother was the head of the German army fighting the Battle of the Bulge. Jürgen was a pacifist. He got out of Germany, came to the United States, somehow ended up in Cleveland and started Shaker Square Beverage, a retail store. To supply that, he bought wine from France and Germany. But there were no distributors to speak of in Ohio that wanted to handle the wines that he wanted to bring in.
Enter Jim Forbes.
Our father had spent 30-some years working for General Electric at Nela Park and retired, looked around for something to do because he was in his 50s and he wanted to keep working. Friends of his knew of some wineries for sale, but nobody took the bait.
In his due diligence, my father got in to see Jürgen von Luttwitz at Shaker Square Beverage, and Jürgen told him, what we really need is an importer and distributor that can handle the wines that I can sell. The idea was born.
I think it was logical. They were in the retail, von Luttwitz and Shaker Square Beverage on the retail side of the business, so they decided, let's start a wholesale business.
Jürgen also volunteered to give my dad his first employee, who was Gene Perino.
Gene worked for von Luttwitz and learned the wine trade from him.
So it really worked out well. My dad was able to start the business with the help of Gene Perino. Gene was a great sales guy and knew wine. My dad knew nothing about wine. We used no wine in our course of life until vintage wine was started. But my dad knew business.
Between the business know-how of Jim Forbes and the wine expertise of Gene Perino, vintage wine was up and running.
Gene, of course, was the leader, just that, you know, he had this knowledge that he had acquired with Shaker Square Beverage. And Casey's dad, of course, was very much involved with all the decision-making and the business side of things. So between those two people, they really were the initial front people for all the developments and how things came along through the course of time.
No question about it, Gene was a legend. He had a great reputation as somebody extremely knowledgeable about wines from around the world, and I think he was certainly an expert in many wines from America, like California. And early on, back in the 80s, when they really first started, this was a valuable tool to have a gentleman like this that had so much knowledge.
I think a lot of his success was how comfortable he made people feel about wine, because if you think about in the 50s and 60s and even early 70s, wine was kind of stuffy. I mean, California wine came to Ohio because of my father. It was one of the things, he was the first to do that. That's a big deal now. You can't imagine us not having California wine.
Working with Gene Perino, who I called Papa G, he was the pioneer. He knew what it took to really grow with your customers. He was on the streets, and he had such respect in the industry. Throw his name out, everybody knew who he was. And if you were associated with Gene and vintage wine, you were one of the best.
At the very beginning, it was Gene, Jim, and Jim's daughter, Leslie. Leslie, a recent college grad, helped Jim and Gene with everything: sales calls, legal compliance, deliveries, bookkeeping, you name it. She was with the company for the first 1.5 years and never received a paycheck. What dedication to the startup company! Thank you, Leslie. The little company grew, and by late 1974, the payroll included Charlie Dane, Casey Forbes, and Stu Solito.
Casey and I were just, newly minted, college graduates. And then, of course, Stu Solito was, I believe, at the same time, sort of the main salesman along with Gene Perino.
One of our first employees was Stu Solito. We hired him when he was 19 years old. He was underage for drinking alcohol, but he didn't look like that. We had to go to the Division of Liquor Control to get a permit for him to sell.
And the state had just passed a law that said if you're 18 to 21, you could ring up a wine sale in a store, like a carryout environment.
Gene went before the head of the Division of Liquor Control and said, here's the deal with Stu Solito. We know he's 19 years old. We know he's underage. We also know he's not going to swallow wine, because then that would be illegal, and you can't do that. So he's going to spit all the time. So, yeah, right.
Okay, so I get my vendor's license, and Gene gave me some accounts and said, go see what you can do. And that's where it all started.
But where was Vintage Wine? Their first warehouse has quite the storied history.
Our first warehouse was at Shaker Square in a retail shopping center. It was an underground warehouse. What this facility was a bowling alley that caught on fire.
There weren't any pins there or alleys. It was just a concrete floor with posts everywhere.
I think there were 12 lanes worth of wine in that old warehouse facility. So it was downstairs.
We had one bathroom. We didn't pay for utilities, because I don't think the utility companies ever knew we were there. Financially, it was very, very affordable. From a mechanical point of view, a logistics point of view, it was horrible.
Casey's father and some of his General Electric friends put together a conveyor belt that was a very interesting engineering marvel that would kind of go over these stair steps that went to the basement and out kind of a side door and over a railing so that we could actually unload containers down in Shaker Square.
And sometimes the boxes would be uneven. They'd roll down rather than be conveyored down. They'd fall off. You'd have broken wine all over the place.
It was a small shop, so it did a little bit of everything. You had 5 people in a business. A tractor trailer would pull into the Heinen's parking lot, And we'd have to block off the entire back parking lot of Heinen's to get this thing stopped and unloaded. And that's all hands on deck. That's everybody doing that.
As Vintage was navigating the struggles of being a small business, something would occur in their third year of operation that would nearly stop Vintage in its tracks.
One Monday morning, I walked into work and I was just dumbfounded. We had about 2 feet of water throughout the entire warehouse. Boxes were floating all over the place.
The basement was absolutely a mess. The water had seeped down, gone through the bottom cases, gotten the cardboard wet. Everything was stacked on the floor at the time, so the cardboard gave out, the bottles were upside down, so yeah, the domino effect, it was a mess.
The cases were all stacked on the floor, straight on the floor, no pallets. So the bottom case got soaking wet, which meant the top 5 cases tipped over. I was not with the company then, but I enjoyed some really good low-cost wine.
What I remember about the flood was that I think we had to go there and help him glue labels back on bottles. That's kind of what I remember, and clean up, you know, the boxes that were really bad on the bottom, like try to save what we could. But, you know, and then after that, then we had to go through and see, well, can we save the bottles, even if we couldn't save the box? You know, put it in another box, just get another label.
It took us 2 weeks to get to our desks that were halfway down the warehouse. I think we lost about half of our inventory. And then you got to go back and buy more. But we had no place to put stuff. We had to clean up. It took us 6 months to clean up. We were very fortunate that customers really rallied around us and saved us.
Due to their loyal customers and unyielding resolve, Vintage Wine survived. The company continued to build on its success, and in the summer of 1979, they moved out of the basement and into a new, above-ground warehouse. Around the same time, a new leader would emerge within the company. Jim Forbes' son, Casey, would be made president at the end of the 70s.
Casey Forbes is the mogul. he's the man now.
One thing that's always impressed me about Casey is he cares about families. The most important thing to him was how he had so many people to take care of, whether it be salespeople or truck drivers or people in the office. He cared about keeping them employed and keeping these families healthy and happy and prosperous.
When I first started working here, Casey was not technically my boss, but he was the president and owner of the company, and he was never somebody that I was afraid of. He has so much business knowledge and so much wine knowledge, but he doesn't shove it at you. He puts it into conversations and just kind of gives you little nuggets here and there.
Fun is always the last thing that Casey seems to say. You know, it's get the job done, but let's have fun doing it.
You know, I think the reason that we've been able to survive is just Casey's just disinterest in selling.
Throughout 50 years, Vintage Wine has always remained independent.
The thing that really stands out is seeing the same people's faces in this building when I walked in. And then the consistent ownership. You know, all these other distributors are being bought out by bigger conglomerates. I mean, it's been in the Forbes names, I think, from day one. So, you know, having the same leadership goes a long way.
Vintage wants to be different than the big companies. We want to do things differently. We don't want to be owned by any one particular brand. It works. It works. We're always looking for things that maybe other companies don't go after. I mean, Vintage is probably the pioneer in the sake business way before anybody ever heard about it.
When you're with a big company and they have, say, 100 brands, well, they got to try to pay attention to 100 different people. Whereas somebody smaller, like a Vintage Wine, they gave us the attention. They gave us the time of day. We were important to them. And over the years, certainly working with them for 32 years plus now, you go, wow, the attention that they continue to give us is incredible.
In the 80s and 90s, the wine industry changed quickly. The popularity of California wines presented Vintage with new opportunities.
When we started, the bulk of our wines came from France and Germany, not even Italy. Little by little, though, we started branching out. Italian wine growers started coming over to the U.S., seeing the U.S. as a big market.
Things just really started to take off because we just kept picking up good brands that people wanted. You know, we had the Mondavis and the Stag's Leaps of the world back in the day, and we just kept finding more and more wineries.
And the California business was definitely a burgeoning industry, where before, if you wanted quality wines, they were imported. And the California industry didn't really exist the way it does now, where you're talking thousands of producers in California. Well, I think getting Robert Mondavi was a big deal, because that was something that really launched them to a much broader audience. And after that, their reputation preceded them for just about everybody.
Service throughout the state with the Cleveland warehouse grew and grew. Eventually, an expanded version of statewide service emerged.
Peter Borlas, who worked with us, we assigned him the Columbus market. He'd get in there once a week, and twice a week, and 3 times a week, and he just built the business up. Peter really built the business for us. The volume was there. So in 1985, we hired my brother Bill. It worked out very well.
So we had a new brand from California that we were introducing, and we wanted to have Casey and Gene be the distributor for it in Ohio. So we met with them for lunch and talked with them about bringing the wines into Cleveland, and they agreed, but they had one stipulation. They said that they wanted us to give the brands to them for their new operation in Columbus, Ohio. At that time, prior to that, they had nobody in Columbus, and we said, sure, no problem.
The same thing occurred to us in Cincinnati, Dayton.
You know, we always service Cincinnati out of Columbus, so we've been a presence in Cincinnati since we were in Columbus, but we didn't have a warehouse there. We delivered it out of Columbus.
We were running 6 trucks a day, pretty much, from Columbus to Southwest Ohio, and so it wasn't a very efficient operation. And over the last 5 years, that was a goal of mine, was to expand our operations down in Southwest Ohio, and then we opened in May of 2020. Our sales down there have increased, our customer service has improved, our sales reps are much happier with having an operation right there as opposed to 100 miles away.
While the now statewide company has found success, its problems were not over.
It's unfortunate, but sometimes it happens. We're moving containers from all over the world. A number of years ago, we had a container that we shipped from Germany. It hit a huge storm right around the Azores. The boat actually split in half, and our German container is now at the bottom of the Azores. So if you're looking for a good Riesling, I'm sure it's probably still in great shape, but you can head down there and check it out.
A more serious problem would impact the company in 1993, the loss of one of their biggest brands, Robert Mondavi Winery.
When I first started in the mid-90s, we lost Robert Mondavi, which was a major brand. That was eye-opening. I walked into a company that had, X amount of people, and the next day it was Y, because they had left to go to the distributor that now had Mondavi, because half of their paycheck was driven as commission salespeople by Mondavi sales.
Well, actually, I was in Italy when we lost Robert Mondavi, and that was huge. And I called the office just to check in, and they're like, you need to talk to your father. I'm like, why do I need to talk to my father? Just let me get your dad. So he told me, and it was very overwhelming, but we made that up in a short amount of time. So was it a growing pain or was it a growth? I think it was more of a growth. Things change, and you have to be able to move on.
Adopting to constant change while achieving steady growth has been a great strength of the company. In the 21st century, a new generation joined the ranks of vintage wine.
I have witnessed a few struggles in my time here at Vintage. A lot of it, I would think, has to deal with the older generation and the new generation and kind of getting over those hurdles. So a lot of my job has been making people feel comfortable in the way that we can do things now, in the way that we can get things done in a more efficient manner, but still service the customer to an exceptional level.
You know, over time, we've realized that you cannot always do things, you know, we may have used to do when there were 4 or 5 people here. You know, now there's 130 people here. So we realize now with kind of the modern times that you've got to use some of what you've learned in the past and then adjust it and evolve and make sure that you can get with the quote-unquote new times and understand people's wants and needs and desires and things like that. So you got to combine it all into sort of a mixing pot and find some kind of common ground there and use those things to your advantage.
The new generation of leaders and staff have strengthened and augmented the company culture. Vintage is well positioned to continue its pursuit of excellence into the future.
We're hiring young people and we're trying to train them in our way, and also trying to listen to them because the generation that's coming up now has a lot of great ideas. And we're trying to fuse that into our business model today so that we have something that's sustainable and good for everybody. We're gonna always employ people that have 30 years age difference between one another. We need all those people. That's the nature of our business.
I think we're really at a turning point with this new generation that's coming in. It's a lot of new ideas and a lot of new cultures kind of merging together. And I think that we're gonna see a lot more growth and a lot more fun.
The up and coming leaders that we have today at Vintage Wine, we've got Darren, who's leading things for us, Steve. We've got great leaders with Louis and Michelle. All of these folks have individual strengths, and when we bring them all together, it's greater than the sum of its parts. And I firmly believe that the talent that we've got is gonna really make us much more stronger in the future.
We survived through a number of struggles, but I don't think I ever thought of throwing in the towel, of calling it quits. No way. Some of our competitors are driven by their vendors, their suppliers. That is not us. It has worked for many other companies, but that's not us. We are driven by a respect for our customers and a respect for our own colleagues. It's been a joy, getting into trouble and getting out of trouble. And we are not done having fun.